Dominic Cole stepped into the glass lobby of Sterling Group with a bundle of deep red roses in his arms, and his old jacket still damp from the rain. CEO Violet Sterling looked at him, looked at his skin, looked at the worn soles of his shoes, then coldly ordered security to remove him, because she did not accept what she called charity gifts. But when the card slipped from the bouquet and fell to the marble floor, everything on her face changed. On it was the handwriting of her dead father. Trust the man who carries these flowers. Don't look away, because that card is about to bring an empire to its knees before him. The alarm on Dominic Cole's phone went off at 5:15 in the morning, the same as every other day. He silenced it before the second ring, swung his legs off the couch that doubled as his bed, and stood in the dark of the apartment listening for any sound from the back room. Nothing. Levi was still asleep. He had another hour. Dominic moved quietly to the kitchen and started the coffee. While it brewed, he counted what was left in the envelope he kept taped to the inside of the cabinet door. $43. Rent was due on Friday. It was Tuesday. He had already picked up one extra shift at the flower shop this week and was scheduled for another on Thursday morning. But Thursday felt very far away when you were holding $43 and thinking about Friday. He put the envelope back and started on Levi's breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, and the last of the orange juice, stretched thin with a little water, because Levi never noticed, and Dominic had stopped feeling guilty about it. The boy ate what was put in front of him without complaint, and always said thank you. That alone made Dominic feel like he was doing something right, even on mornings like this one. The call came at 6:42, just as Dominic was pulling on his second sock. It was Marcus from Petals and Green to the flower shop, 3 blocks over where Dominic worked part-time behind the sorting counter. Marcus sounded apologetic and hoarse. Derek called out sick. He needed someone to run the Sterling Group delivery before 9. It was a prepaid order, been in the system for years. Special instructions. The client who placed it was gone now. Past the year before, but his attorney had set it up on a timer. Today was the day it went out. Dominic looked at the clock. He looked at the door to the back room where Levi was still sleeping. His neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, had a doctor's appointment at 10, but she was home now and she owed him one from the time he had fixed her kitchen faucet without asking for anything. He knocked on her door at 6:50, and she agreed to watch Levi for the morning, told him to go, told him the boy would be fine. Marcus was very specific about one thing. The card had to reach the CEO directly, not a secretary, not a receptionist, the CEO herself. The attorney had been emphatic. Whatever you do, don't lose the card. Dominic wrote the address on the back of a gas receipt and headed for the shop. The bouquet was not like the other arrangements he handled at Petals and Green. Most of what came through the shop were grocery store rows of color, reds and pinks wrapped in cellophane, the kind people bought when they forgot an anniversary. This was different. Deep red roses, densely packed, the petals like crushed velvet, arranged by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. They were tied with a black ribbon knotted twice, not once, and at the center of the ribbon, tucked rather than attached, was a small ivory envelope, sealed with silver wax, pressed into a shield shape he did not recognize. When Dominic picked up the arrangement from the back of the shop, it felt heavier than it looked. He held it carefully, the same way he used to handle calibration reports at his old job, the kind of document where a single misread line could cost someone very badly. He stepped outside into the rain and walked to the bus stop. One arm curved around the bouquet to keep it dry. The Sterling Group lobby was the kind of space that made most people feel smaller than they were. Marble floors, 2 stories of glass, potted trees that had probably been there longer than some of the staff. The reception desk was a curved slab of pale stone, staffed by 2 women in matching dark blazers who had mastered the art of looking politely dismissive. Dominic pushed through the revolving door at 8:41 and paused just inside to shake the rain off his jacket with one free hand. He had the bouquet of red roses in the other. The woman at the desk looked up. Her eyes landed on his skin first. They stayed there for a beat, longer than they needed to. Then they moved to his shoes, to his jacket, to the flowers. Her expression was neutral in the way that meant she had already made a judgment. Can I help you? Delivery for Violet Sterling. Prepaid order from Petals and Green. Deliveries go to the mailroom on the second floor. I have specific instructions that this goes to Miss Sterling directly. It's a personal item, not a standard order. The woman at the desk exchanged a brief look with her colleague. It was the kind of look Dominic had seen many times, in many different lobbies across his life. The kind of look that said they already knew what kind of person he was before he had finished his sentence. Mason Reed appeared from the corridor to the left. He was the head of building security, broad across the shoulders, his hand resting near his belt, in a way that was not threatening, but was not casual either. Sir, do you have a scheduled delivery slot? No, I was told this was time-sensitive and needed to reach the CEO before 9. A group of men in expensive suits crossed the lobby without looking in Dominic's direction. The revolving door turned behind him, and a man in a cashmere coat swept through, was greeted by name, and walked straight to the elevator without breaking stride. Dominic stood where he was and held the flowers and did not move. One of the receptionists leaned toward the other and whispered something. The word audacious carried just far enough. Then, quieter but not quiet enough. These people always try. The elevator opened, and 3 people came out. Hannah Price walking quickly with a tablet in her hand, Connor Blake in a charcoal suit, and Violet Sterling half a step ahead of both of them. She saw the roses first, deep red against the gray marble, then the black ribbon, then the ivory envelope. She kept walking. Take it to the mailroom. Dominic stepped forward. Miss Sterling, I was asked to deliver this to you personally, and I was told the card should be read before I don't accept flower deliveries. Her voice was simply final. Connor Blake glanced at Dominic with faint amusement. I know her time is valuable, Dominic said, still addressing Violet. The person who arranged this delivery is someone you knew. The instructions were specific, and they were set up more than a year in advance. Violet turned back and looked at him. Really looked this time. Mason, she said quietly. Mason stepped forward and put a hand on Dominic's arm. He did it firmly enough that the bouquet shifted. The ivory envelope slipped from the black ribbon, turned once in the air, and landed face up on the marble floor. The silver wax seal caught the lobby light, a shield shape, pressed deep and precise. Violet saw it, and her face went still. She knew that seal. She had seen it on every piece of correspondence her father had sent to his attorney, on every personal letter she had found in his desk after he was gone. It was Charles Sterling's seal. Stop, she said. Mason let go of Dominic's arm. The lobby had gone quietly alert, the way rooms do when the person in charge changes tone suddenly. Violet walked to where the envelope lay on the marble. She bent down and picked it up herself. Her hands were very steady when she opened it. She broke the silver seal cleanly, peeled back the flap, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. She read it, without making any sound. Then, she read it again. The lobby was silent enough that the rain on the glass was audible. Connor Blake said, in the tone of someone being reasonable, it could be a forgery. People do this kind of thing. They research executives. They find signatures. It's not a forgery. Violet's voice was quiet, but it had weight. I know my father's handwriting. The note was short. It said, Violet, if you're still angry with me, stay angry for later. But first, trust the man who carries these flowers. She folded the paper and held it against her palm. Dominic watched her face and said nothing. He had not known what the card said. He still did not. He had taken the job because Marcus needed someone to cover a delivery, and he needed the hours, and the alternative was sitting at home counting $43. He looked at the CEO of Sterling Group holding a note from her dead father, and he felt that there was something very large happening around him that he did not yet have the shape of. Who are you? Violet asked. My name is Dominic Cole. I work part-time at Petals and Green. I was asked to make this delivery. Do you know why my father chose you? I didn't know he was your father. She studied him for a long moment. That's not an answer. I met a man about 3 years ago, Dominic said carefully. I helped him when his car was in trouble on a rainy night. He was kind to me afterward. I didn't know his name at the time, and I didn't learn it after. That's the honest extent of what I know." Violet looked at Dominic. For the first time since he walked through that revolving door, she was not looking at his jacket or his shoes or his skin. She was looking at him. She was looking at the steadiness in his face, the way he held himself without apology, without pleading, without the performance of either humility or defiance. She saw a man who had walked into a building that did not want him and had stayed because he had been asked to do a simple thing and intended to do it. Something in that steadiness unsettled her, not because it was threatening, but because it was the exact quality she had spent 14 months looking for in every advisor, every consultant, every board member who sat across from her in this building and told her what they thought she wanted to hear. And here it was, standing in her lobby in a wet jacket, holding red roses. "Hannah," she said, "please take Mr. Cole somewhere he can wait comfortably, not the main lobby." She looked at Dominic. "I'd like to talk with you before you leave." Connor's jaw set slightly. He said nothing. Hannah stepped forward and gestured toward the elevator. Dominic nodded once, gathered the roses more securely, and followed her. As he walked away, he could feel the eyes of the two receptionists on his back. He did not turn around. He had learned a long time ago that turning around to meet those kinds of eyes only gave them what they wanted, which was confirmation that he knew where he stood. The small waiting area Hannah led him to was on the 4th floor, a room with good chairs, a side table with coffee and water, and a view of the city in the rain. Hannah poured him a cup of coffee without asking if he wanted one, which was the kind of small kindness that told Dominic she had understood something about the morning that the people downstairs had not. He sat and held the coffee and looked at the rain moving down the glass and thought about Levi at Mrs. Callahan's apartment, probably sitting on her couch with his toy car, the red one with the missing back wheel, watching something on television and being no trouble at all. Violet came in 20 minutes later. She sat across from Dominic and set the folded note on the table between them. "Tell me about the night you met my father," she said. Dominic was quiet for a moment. He remembered the rain. He remembered he had been terrified because Levi had a fever of 103 and he had been driving to the urgent care clinic when he saw the car stopped at an angle against the curb on Hadley Road, hazard lights blinking. The man inside was older, gray-haired, well-dressed. He had gotten out to check the front of the car and was standing in the rain without a coat. The car had sideswiped the curb hard enough to blow a tire and trigger something in the engine, but the man was unhurt. What he was, Dominic realized, was shaken. Badly shaken in the quiet way older people sometimes were, the way that looked like calm but was not. Dominic pulled over. He did not particularly want to. His son was sick, and he was behind, and the rain was coming down sideways, but he pulled over. He called roadside assistance. He helped the man back into the car, out of the rain, then gave the man his own jacket because the car was too cold to warm up quickly, and the man had started to shiver. He sat with Levi in the back seat of his own car, with his arm around his son, and watched through the windshield until the tow truck arrived. When the tow truck came, he helped the driver get the car hooked up and guided 2 lanes of traffic around the scene until things were moving again. The man had taken his hand before the tow truck left. He had gripped it with both of his and said, without explaining what he meant, "One day, what you are will come back to you." Violet listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked a question he was not expecting. "What did you do before you worked at the flower shop?" "Operations engineering," Dominic said. "I ran route efficiency analysis for a mid-size freight company called Meridian Freight Solutions. I worked in that industry for about 5 years." "Why did you leave?" "I was asked to sign off on a performance summary that I knew was inaccurate. It overstated the efficiency of a cold chain route by a significant margin. When I refused, the situation became uncomfortable. I left." Violet's expression shifted into something more focused. Meridian Freight Solutions is a subcontractor on several routes through the Mid-Atlantic corridor. Dominic paused. "Some of those routes ran through your network." The silence in the room changed quality. Hannah knocked once and opened the door without waiting. "I found a filed report from 3 years ago," she said quietly. "It's in the archived compliance records. There's a name on the refusal signature. Violet already knew what the name was going to be. The report flagged a structural gap in our cold chain network, Hannah continued. If the gap had been addressed at the time, we would have caught approximately 14 months of fraudulent cost allocation before it compounded. She stopped. The report was buried. By whom? Violet asked. Hannah glanced toward the door. By the same person who has been presenting the solvency projections to the board. The board meeting convened at 11 in the main conference room on the 36th floor. 12 people around the long table. Most of them older than Violet. All of them white. All of them looking at the prepared presentation on the screen at the end of the room with the concentrated attention people give things when they have been told the situation is urgent. Connor Blake stood at the front and spoke with the unhurried assurance of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times in front of a mirror and once more in the car on the way in. He laid out the numbers in careful sequence: root losses, margin compression, debt service costs, supply chain disruption penalties. He built the case slowly, like a house built specifically to have only one door, and the door was the partial sale of operational control to a group called Arcturus Capital Partners. Several board members were already nodding before he finished. That was the thing about numbers when they came from someone confident and well-dressed and standing at the head of a room. They tended to produce a kind of hypnotic agreement that had less to do with truth than with presentation. Violet let him finish. She did not interrupt, did not shift in her chair, did not give any outward sign that the presentation she had just watched was anything other than thorough. Then she said, "I'd like to bring someone in." Connor looked at her. "The decision timeline, I know the timeline. I'm asking for 15 minutes. She did not phrase it as a question. Dominic came into the room in his damp jacket. 12 board members looked at him the way people look at something that does not belong in the room it is in. Their eyes moved across his skin first, the way eyes in rooms like this one always did, then to his wrists without a watch, the seams of his jacket, the absence of a briefcase or badge or any of the small tokens that granted a person permission to exist in this space. One member near the far end of the table shifted his water glass aside as though clearing space between himself and whatever was about to happen. Another folded his arms. A woman 2 seats down looked at Violet with an expression that asked, without words, whether this was serious. Connor Blake said pleasantly, "Are we having the florist weigh in on our financial structure?" Nobody laughed, but nobody objected either, which was its own kind of answer. Dominic did not respond to Connor. He looked at the screen. The data on it was familiar, in the way that childhood roads are familiar, not because you studied them, but because you traveled them so many times they became part of how you move through the world. He recognized the root codes. He recognized the timeline. He recognized in the structure of the numbers a particular kind of falsification that he had last seen 3 years ago on a spreadsheet that had cost him his career. "The loss categories in columns 8 through 11, he said. His voice was steady and unhurried, in a way that made several people in the room sit slightly straighter. They're all routed through the same third-party carrier. That carrier doesn't own enough rolling stock to run those routes at the volume shown. A board member, a woman with silver hair, named Margaret Ashby, leaned forward. "How do you know that?" "Because I worked in this network. I know what those carriers can and can't move. The volumes on that screen are physically impossible given the fleet size that carrier operated in those years." The room was very quiet. Connor's smile had not left his face, but it had changed shape, the way a mask changes shape when the face beneath it shifts. Margaret Ashby looked at the screen, then at Dominic, then at the screen again. She had been on this board for 11 years, and she had never once seen anyone walk into this room uninvited and say something that made the air feel different. Until now, Connor said smoothly that the analysis was interesting but came from someone without standing, without current credentials, without access to verified records. He said it the way men in expensive suits have always said things about men in damp jackets, with the particular confidence that comes from knowing the room is already on your side. He looked at the board members as he spoke, not at Dominic, because addressing Dominic directly would have been an acknowledgement that Dominic was worth addressing, and Connor was not prepared to make that concession. Not yet. Not while the room still belonged to him. "You don't have access to current. I'm not talking about current," Dominic said. His voice was calm. The kind of calm that came not from performance, but from having said this exact thing before to people who did not want to hear it, and having paid the price, and having said it anyway. I'm talking about the dates on your own report. He walked closer to the screen. Several board members shifted in their chairs, not away from him exactly, but with the unconscious adjustment people make when a person they had dismissed begins to occupy more space than expected. March through August, 3 years ago. During that window, this carrier would have needed 3 times its actual capacity to run the routes being billed. But the invoices were paid, which means either the carrier had assets it never registered, which someone would have caught, or the costs were fabricated and assigned to these routes to make them look like operating losses. He paused. He was not performing. He was simply laying facts on the table the way a carpenter lays boards, with precision and without apology. I know this because I filed a report that said exactly this 3 years ago, and that report disappeared. Connor started to respond, his voice still carrying the measured patience of a man explaining something to someone beneath him. But Violet spoke first. "I have the camera logs," she said. The room shifted. Hannah connected her tablet to the room's display system. The screen split. On one side, the billing records Connor had presented. On the other, warehouse exit logs from a regional distribution center. The one linked to the heaviest loss routes on the dates corresponding to the largest invoices. The logs showed 0 outbound movement. The trucks had not moved, but the costs had been recorded. The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of people rearranging everything they thought they knew. Margaret Ashby said very quietly, "Pull up the carrier's registration and fleet records." Connor stood at the front of the room and was very still. His hands, which had been gesturing with the easy confidence of a presenter moments before, were now at his sides. The color had not left his face, but something behind it had shifted. The way a building looks the same from the outside, even after the foundation is cracked. An older board member, a man who had looked at Dominic when he entered the room with an expression that sat somewhere between suspicion and dismissal, now turned to look at him with entirely different eyes. It was not an apology, not yet, but it was the acknowledgement that something he had been certain of 60 seconds ago was no longer certain. And the man in the wrong jacket, with the wrong skin color, was the reason he now had to reconsider. Margaret Ashby turned to Violet. "How long have you known about this?" "Since this morning," Violet said. "Since a man I tried to have removed from my lobby showed me something I should have seen a long time ago." The weight of that sentence settled over the table like weather. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The older board member who had folded his arms when Dominic walked in now unfolded them. He placed both hands flat on the table, the way a man does when the ground beneath him is shifted. He looked at Dominic, and for the first time his gaze did not contain judgment. It contained the uncomfortable recognition of a man who understood that he had decided, in the space between one breath and the next, that the person walking in did not matter. And he had been wrong. Not just wrong about the data, wrong about the man. Then Margaret said, "I want to see the full compliance file." Grace Whitman arrived within the hour. She was Charles Sterling's personal attorney, a woman who carried a leather briefcase the way some people carried authority, with no need to announce it. She had been called by Violet from the 4th floor and had come with the practiced composure of someone used to rooms that had recently changed temperature. She set the briefcase on the table and opened it without ceremony. She presented the contents of the secure file from Charles Sterling's private office. There was a USB drive. There was a sealed folder of printed communications, and there was a handwritten timeline that Charles had compiled over the last 18 months of his life, tracking a series of anomalies in the company's freight network that he had not been able to fully explain before his health failed. The handwriting started precise and grew shaky as the months progressed, the way a man's body fails before his mind does. Grace explained that Charles had instructed her to release the file only when the flowers were delivered, and only to Violet directly. He had been specific in the way that dying men are specific when they know their specificity is all they have left. If the flowers go out, it means I am gone, and the danger I was tracking has arrived. Give my daughter everything. The USB drive contained emails. The emails contained numbers. The numbers matched what Dominic had identified in the billing records, and the thread of communications ran through a single account, organized under a single name, Connor Blake. The room processed this the way rooms process things that are both shocking and, in retrospect, inevitable. There was silence, then murmuring, then the particular kind of stillness that comes when people realize they have been standing in a burning building and mistaking the heat for sunlight. Margaret Ashby removed her glasses and set them on the table. She looked at the handwritten timeline, at the shaky letters near the end, and something in her expression changed from professional attention to something more personal, the look of a woman who had known Charles Sterling for 20 years and was only now understanding what his final months had looked like from the inside. She touched the edge of the last page with one finger, very lightly, as though it were something that might break. Connor left the room before the session formally adjourned. He left with the controlled speed of someone who knows the door is still open but understands it will not be for long. He did not look at Dominic as he passed. He did not look at Violet. He looked straight ahead, and the straightness of his gaze was its own kind of confession. Two board members who had been most aligned with his position followed him into the hallway. Voices rose briefly, and then quieted. The remaining board members sat in a silence that had weight and texture. One of them, a man who had nodded along with Connor's presentation not 30 minutes before, picked up the printed summary in front of him, looked at it, and set it down again face first, as though he could not stand to see the numbers anymore. Another reached for the handwritten timeline and began reading it from the beginning. Slowly, the way you read something when you understand that you are holding a record of a man's final effort to protect the thing he built. Margaret Ashby looked at Violet. Then she looked at Dominic. Then she said to no one in particular, "Your father was thorough." Violet looked at the red roses that had been placed on the credenza along the wall. She said quietly, "Yes, he always was." The bouquet sat there among the coffee cups and the printed reports and the debris of a meeting that had begun as a financial presentation and ended as an unraveling. The roses were very red against the pale wood. They looked like they had been waiting there a long time, the way certain truths wait, patient and undeniable, until the room is finally ready to see them. 3 hours later, Violet found Dominic in the lobby. The same lobby where that morning she had told security to remove him. The same marble floor where the card had fallen. The same glass walls through which the same rain was still falling, though softer now, as if the day itself had grown tired. Dominic was standing near the door, looking at the rain through the glass. He did not turn when Violet approached because he heard her heels on the marble and chose to wait. She came to stand beside him. They both looked at the rain for a moment. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You don't have to, I do, and I want to give it properly." She turned to face him. Several staff members were in earshot, which she did not manage. This was a thing she needed to say where it could be heard. "I judged you by everything that didn't matter. Your skin, your jacket, the fact that you came through that door looking like someone this building was designed to keep out. I made a fast, easy decision, and I was wrong." Dominic looked at her. His expression was not cold, and it was not warm in the way that made people feel forgiven cheaply. It was something steadier than either. "I accept that," he said. "But the apology you owe me is the smallest one on the list. The bigger debt is to the next black man in a wet jacket who walks through that door with something real to say and gets shown to the street because he doesn't look expensive enough. Whatever you change here, start there." Violet was quiet for a moment. Something in what he said had landed in a place she was not prepared to defend. She did not try to defend it. "I'd like to offer you something formal," she said. "Your personnel file will have the record corrected. The refusal report will be reinstated with the context it should have had, and I'd like to engage you as an independent operations consultant to review the full supply chain at a proper rate." "I appreciate that. You sound like you're going to say no." He looked at her, and there was something almost careful in the look. "I'm going to say not yet. I need time to think about whether I want to step back into this world, and what form that should take." He shifted the strap of his bag. "I need to get home. Mrs. Callahan has been watching my son all morning, and I told her I'd be back by noon." "How old is he?" Violet asked. 6. She nodded. Something crossed her face. That was not pity. It was closer to recognition, the recognition of someone who understood what it meant to carry more weight than you were built for, and to carry it anyway because there was no one else. Mason Reed found Dominic near the door on his way out and stopped him. He was not in security mode. He was a man standing in a lobby, holding his hands in front of him the way people hold their hands when they are not sure where else to put them. "I was out of line this morning," Mason said. "I had orders, and I followed them without thinking about the whole picture." Dominic paused. "My son is 6. He wasn't here today, but he watches everything. He watches how buildings like this treat his father. That lives somewhere in him. If you want to do something with the apology, think about that the next time someone comes in with the wrong shoes." Mason nodded slowly. They shook hands. Dominic walked out into the afternoon. That evening, alone in her office, Violet read the rest of her father's letter. She had read the first portion that morning with Grace, the portion that named Connor's fraud, that traced the buried reports, that laid out the structure of what he had suspected and what he had confirmed. But there was a second part, written in a different pen, in handwriting that looked more labored. The way his handwriting had looked in the final months when holding a pen required the kind of effort that used to go into holding a boardroom. He wrote, "I have spent most of my life in rooms like the one you're sitting in now, and I want to tell you the only thing I learned in all of them that was worth knowing. The people who will protect this company are not the people who speak loudest in those rooms. They are the people who say no when saying no costs them everything, and then go home and feed their children anyway. I met one of those people on a rainy road when I was frightened and alone, and he gave me his coat without knowing who I was. That is rarer than anything this company will ever produce." He wrote, "The red roses are not what you think they are. Your mother loved those roses before we lost each other. I sent them every year, not to make you forgive either of us, but to remind you that love doesn't stop being real because it becomes painful. You stopped receiving them because you couldn't see past the pain. I understand that. I only ask that you try." He wrote, "If Dominic Cole carried those roses to you, it means 2 things. It means the day I hoped would never come did come, the day the company was in real danger, and it means he is still, after all this time, the kind of man I believed he was. Trust that. You have not trusted enough of the right things." Violet set the letter down. She sat in her father's old chair in her own office and looked at the red roses, which Hannah had transferred to a vase on the windowsill, before she left for the evening. The rain had stopped. The city outside the window was the city after rain, darker and shinier and very still. She cried for a while, not publicly, not dramatically, just the quiet, private kind of grief that does not announce itself, the kind that comes when you understand something you should have understood a long time ago and cannot decide whether it is better or worse that you finally understand it now. She held the letter against her chest and sat in the dark office while the city lights came on one by one outside the glass. Somewhere across town, Dominic was sitting at Mrs. Callahan's kitchen table while Levi ate a grilled cheese sandwich and told him about the cartoon he had watched that morning. The boy had his toy car beside his plate, and he was happy in the uncomplicated way that children are happy when they do not yet know how close the edges of things are. Dominic watched his son talk and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not relief exactly, but the faint, cautious sense that maybe the weight he had been carrying was about to change shape. 3 months later, Sterling Group was different in ways that took time to see, but that people who worked there felt immediately. The compliance report that Dominic had originally filed 3 years ago was officially reinstated, with the notation that its original suppression had been the result of deliberate misdirection. Connor Blake was under investigation. The outside investor group had been informed that the acquisition terms required renegotiation. 2 board members who had been most aligned with Connor's position had resigned. The internal policy on whistleblower reports was rewritten in language that had actual teeth. Every formal complaint now required documented review within 30 days and a written response to the person who filed it. Violet presented the new policy to the full staff and then took questions for 40 minutes. which was not something the staff had ever seen a Sterling CEO do. The company added a bias audit protocol for its visitor and contractor intake process. Violet named the internal policy the Wet Jacket Protocol, and she did not explain the name to anyone who was not in the lobby that morning. Dominic accepted the consulting engagement. He worked 2 days a week out of an office 2 floors below Violet's, in a space that was quiet and had good natural light, which were the only conditions he asked for. He still worked a few shifts at Petals and Green because Marcus needed him sometimes, and because he still liked the smell of the place in the early morning, the way the cold air and the flowers made something that was not quite perfume and was not quite the outdoors, but was exactly the smell of a day that had not been ruined yet. In the spring, Violet had the small garden on the company's ground floor terrace replanted. She chose red roses for the border, because she was done pretending she hated them. She held a small gathering there on a Saturday morning. She invited Dominic and Levi. The boy dressed himself in a button-down shirt that was slightly too big and his good sneakers, and he carried his toy car in his shirt pocket because some things were non-negotiable. Levi looked at the roses along the border, then at the fresh bouquet on the table, deep red, and tied with a black ribbon. He looked up at Violet with the complete seriousness of a 6-year-old performing his understanding of an adult occasion. "Are you going to keep them this time?" Violet picked up the bouquet and held it. "Yes," she said. She looked at Dominic over the boy's head. The look was not exactly a smile and not exactly a question. It was something quieter than both. The look of a person who has decided to stop protecting themselves from something that might be worth the risk. The card was one Dominic had written himself, small and plain, tucked into the black ribbon. It said only this: "Kindness does not always arrive when it is ready, but when it is finally seen, it changes the shape of every room it enters." Violet placed the flowers in front of the framed photograph of her father, one where he was laughing at something off camera, one where he looked like the man she sometimes forgot he had been. Levi tugged at his father's hand. "Can we get lunch after?" "Yes." "Something hot?" "Something hot." The sun was moving through the clouds the way it does in early spring, tentative and honest, and very clean. Violet did not call Dominic the flower delivery man anymore. She called him what he was, the man who kept her father's last promise, and perhaps, slowly, cautiously, in the way of 2 people who had both learned what carelessness could cost, something more than that.